he delegated the authority to people he chooses. Totally different than somebody calling themselves on their own. But church should know the difference. We should know the difference. Why? Because we have to be able to discern where the call came from, so we don't get misled. So I would suggest to you, you go listen to a YouTube video, and the person says, I'm going to teach you how to spot false prophets. They don't give any of their credentials in terms of, I'm a pastor and evangelist of this ministry. Okay. I'm backing off. And I'm going to show why in just a minute. I'm not going to listen probably any further unless I just want to see what the error there is. And you think, wow, that's strong. It is. Well, let's talk about it. Let me get into it with you. And the reason I say that is because people are going to go out, people are going to go into ministry, and people are going to come in, and we're going to need to know these things as a body. We're going to need to know how to spot things immediately, how to spot certain things. And it's not to call them out and hurt them. It's to protect yourself and your brothers and sisters, right? That's what it's for. So think about it as we are here together at this little ministry training center called Oasis Church. If we hate titles, what are we saying? If Jesus, now I'm assuming you'll read these and find out that Ephesians 4, and we've taught on this enough where you understand that it says Jesus himself set some in the church. Apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, right? So if he's into titles, what do you think about somebody who purports to preach on his behalf and say that we shouldn't have them? Sounds like a false gospel, doesn't it? Now, why do you use titles? Why would you use them? Respect, that's good. I think that's one, but let's do it. Let's do an example. I want to do a corporation and a government. Okay, corporation and government. Think about this with me. I don't know how much of this I can really write up here, but under a corporation, you have the president of the corporation, right? And then a lot of times, I'll take my time and do this right. Okay. Can you read that? Corporation has a president. The president of the corporation, within certain confines, has all of the authority. Okay? But what you're going to see, if you see a big corporation, you're going to see that the president can't do it all on his own or doesn't want to. And instead, he appoints different people. Might be vice president of marketing, vice president of sales, vice president of quality assurance, whatever you want to call it. Now, each of the VPs, marketing, right, sales, I don't know, what else did I say? Marketing, sales, quality assurance, let's say that. Right? Okay. There you go. Now, each one of these offices, what do you think it represents? If you got one person called the president that has all of the authority, and you could liken that to Christ, because he's the one person that's the head of the whole church, and he's got all the authority. He even said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given unto me, right? So we can figure that out. Now, if he sets forth offices underneath him for certain things, why are the titles important? They're just titles. Why should we even care? They're there to direct and give life in a corporation? Yeah, I guess so. Let me tell you like this. What I think the president is saying is that ultimately he has given the vice president of marketing all authority that has to do with marketing in the company. Right? That's what he's saying. So what is that? All right, let's look at it. I'm going to put it down here so we don't mess up government. We're saying that an authority has been given, right, by the president to the VP. You agree? Now that's something we ought to realize, because if I work in marketing, what kind of moron am I going to be if I go to the vice president and say, I don't take orders from you, I only take my orders from the president? People in church do this all the time. All the time. I hear from God. I don't listen to men. Well, while you're speaking, tell God that he shouldn't have set it up the way he did. He should have set it up the way you wanted it done. Right? Because that's basically what you're saying out loud where everybody can hear you. God did it wrong. My way's better. I'm more important than anybody he chose to give authority to. I know what's best. Now, when you measure that out, you can see which side of the donkey you sound like. I'm just going to leave that like it is. But think about that in real terms, you know, whether you're the back or the front, whether you're going the right way or being used for some other purpose, right? So, now, all right, if authority's been given from the president to the VP, here's the part a lot of people miss. Because this is big too. Not only is there an authority given, but there's an accountability. Who has the accountability? The vice president, somebody said, the VP, to who? The pres. You mean to tell me the VP isn't subject to all the employees? You notice, I'd say 70% of churches are set up that way, where the employees hire their VP. John 10 calls that a hireling. I'm not going to touch that. I'll leave it where it is. But if you're serving under a hireling, you better be careful, because it says when the wolf comes, they're going to run. And you can read that on your own, but that's exactly what that says. That when the wolf comes, the hireling is going to run because they're not really his sheep. Right? Jesus said that himself, by the way. All right, so there's an authority and accountability. But y'all know what? This is something a lot of people don't realize. When they watch a YouTube video and they don't understand who's teaching it, for instance, and they think, wow, this is good stuff, you know, they take it in. There's another accountability too. There's one authority, but there's two accountabilities. Accountability. You ready? The president for his VP. We don't think about that one very often. President gave vice president of marketing authority to handle marketing. In doing so, he created an accountability from his vice president of marketing to him. At the same time, he created an accountability for him for what the VP does. This is why, if you're an employee of this company, you want to make sure that your information that you're basing life decisions on comes from the VP and not just some unnamed source. Because the only person the president will be accountable for giving out information on behalf of is his VP. He is not accountable for what any of the other employees say. If they're sending out memos and if they're recording themselves on Facebook saying things about the company, that president is not going to back up what they're saying. He's going to laugh. What do you mean? You mean Ralph over here in the cubicle beside you told you that you can drop your health insurance, we're going to start paying 100%, and you didn't ask to see the signed memo from the vice president? Well, I'm sorry. Sound like you're foolish to me. Nothing I can do about it. But I read this book, and it told me if I'd give $1,000 to this ministry that the angels would give me 10 times as much in a month. And I'm mad. I want my money. And God's laughing too. He's going, well, if you believe that, you're on your own, you know. But let me ask you this, though. What if God had really called somebody to the role of teacher? And they were mistaken. And they really did tell people that. And people gave up their inheritance and gave it. All of a sudden now that creates an accountability on behalf of God to uphold some of the word of that person that he authorized to teach. And I don't know how he'll do it, but he'll uphold them through this because he is accountable now. Do you understand this huge difference? We're all brothers, but we're not all teachers, brother. We're not all pastors. And just as soon as somebody starts trying to pastor you and they don't have that title, you're going to get in trouble. You're going to get in trouble. Now, you have some people that are called and they haven't been set yet. Okay? And we all have to be able to realize that. Okay? You have some people that are called, but they're not truly pastoring until they're set. When they have a flock, they're set. Now, let me show you this, because we have to understand these differences. Okay. I don't know if we ought to use government. We ought to use a government example. So, ministry of defense. You ever heard of that? How about ministry of interior? That's 2. We'll just go with 2. So in the government over here, you have the prime minister. Prime minister, who's got basically all the authority for government. But the prime minister doesn't want to be bothered with the inner workings of land and everything in the country, so he's going to say ministry of defense. I'm naming you head over that, right? Creates an authority for this person, minister of defense. You agree? Yes. In addition, it creates an accountability for the minister of defense to the prime minister, and same way, creates an accountability for the prime minister on behalf of his minister of defense, or whatever it is, minister of the interior, if he does something wrong. That's true. So, it's interesting. If the minister of defense is having a bunch of nuclear warheads built, because that's his job, but decides on a whim one day that we can dispose of all this waste we're trying to get rid of in a river, and nobody will know. And the fish all through the river and out in the ocean all end up dead, and all these countries are calling up these other nations, hey, we're tracing this tritium leak back to you guys. You cost us $80 billion in such and such. All these countries. All of a sudden, there's a problem. VP's accountable to the president, but the president's accountable to the other nations. Right? Somebody's got to pay some restitution, and the VP doesn't have it. So the president then has to be the one to do it. So you want to make sure you're tied into the chain of command that goes up, and not tied into a chain of command that says, hey, we're all the same, we're all one. We are. But we're also fingers and toes, eyes and ears, head and nose, blah, 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 which is not the same. It's the same, but it ain't the same. Right? So you listen to those things, and you have to see the difference. Now, okay. So what if we had a vice president, and he had other little vice presidents under him? Like, let's say you have executive vice president, and the executive vice president's over this whole huge side of government or over the corporation. And then you had the vice president of accounting, the vice president of, whatever it may be, and on down the line, right? Now, so let's say that. Let's do that. Because this happens. This happens in the church. It really does. All right, so VP sales, maybe. Executive VP of sales. Then you have VP of projections, right? Projected sales. VP of profit. VP of, what do you call it? Hiring and firing. I'm going... Yeah, human resources. Thank you. Human resources. Okay. They're all vice presidents. Every one of them's a vice president. You agree? Yeah. So they're all the same thing. Right? So who has more authority? Exactly. You understand those things happen in churches too, right? You understand that, and I want you to understand this, because it's not just in churches. I'm talking about in the church. Because follow me here for a second. You have an evangelist. Let's say you have an evangelist that never worked for another evangelist. They are called all of a sudden, and they go out and start ministering, and God just provides, and their ministry grows and grows. And then over time, their ministry literally is so big, getting so many calls, they bring in other evangelists under them and authorize them in the name of their ministry to take some of these appointments because they can't make them all, right? Now you understand there's a difference in authority for that one evangelist who's the head of his organization and answers to God than there is in that other evangelist who's not the head of his organization, answers to the evangelist who answers to God. Does that make sense? See, we got to learn this stuff. Why? Because it's important for you to know who you're talking to always so you can measure information. Because the Bible says there'll be wolves in sheep's clothing, and it says the way you will know them will be their fruit. And if somebody won't take a title, at least take a title, even if they're mistaken. You have no way to measure them by. Don't you understand? That's the best case scenario for anybody. I'm not a pastor. I'm not an evangelist. I'm not a prophet. I'm not an apostle. I'm not a teacher. But I'm a very wise Christian that can tell you what's wrong with all of these things. I have no accountability to God or you because I'm not told you I'm anything. But I know all these things and you should listen to me. Wow. That's the perfect storm, isn't it? When you think about it, you have no accountability to the person you're telling it to. You have no accountability to God, and truly you have no authority to do it. So, hey, you're just free. You can just do whatever you want. Be careful. There are a lot of those people that have gone into the world and into the church. Primary reason in 1 John it says, test the spirits. 1 John 4 says, test the spirits. For many false spirits have gone forth into the world. What does that mean? It's not the spirit, it's the person with the spirit on them that is speaking. Right? Test the spirit that's speaking through a person. How would you do that if they don't have a title? How would you know if they're a teacher? What's their fruit? Well, I don't really know. What's their fruit? Well, I don't know. I don't know what they're supposed to be. My wife and I have had conversations about that early in our ministry. We would go to these meetings and these people would speak. And you're like, okay, well, it sounds right, you know. But who are they accountable to? What are they accountable for? And what are they authorized for? And ultimately, how can I judge fruit if I don't know what they are? Well, it just makes you feel good. Well, the Bible tells me feelings don't really count for a whole lot. Well, they gave me a word. Well, the Bible tells me not to go seeking a word. It tells you get your word from God. And then the prophets will confirm a word, or the teacher will confirm a word. See, I'm probably hearing from the devil thinking it's God, making me feel great. There's a lot of feeling in the world. Jesus was not moved by feeling, by the way. He was moved only by faith and truth. That's why his ministry worked. There were other people's ministries were super, made people feel good. They just didn't work ultimately. You know? Because what is God really trying to do? Produce mature believers that can lead others. That can't be swayed by Satan and his forces while they're on the earth. That are so sharp. Not filled with guile, filled with love, but so sharp. When the false comes, they go, no thanks, brother. That's nice, but no thanks. Right? They know. They're sharp. You're going to need to know this stuff because it says in the Bible that in the end times, people will call to themselves teachers that'll teach them what they want to hear. Did you know that? Paul said that to Timothy. He was warning Timothy of that very thing. Now, if you think about hirelings, first of all, I'm not saying that's all that happens, but if you think about employees hiring their own VPs, like we said, and you can relate that to church, okay? However you want to do that. That really sets that scenario up where you have people calling to themselves people to tell them what they want to hear. You have to, I'm not saying that's all that happens out there, but I'm saying if we're not careful, in denominations, we have groups of ideas and we measure those that we will allow to speak to us by our group of ideas, right? We have to be really careful, because if God's trying to get us out of the wrong idea, He can't do it if all we allow to come speak to us are the people that share our ideas. Then God's chosen method of correction is no longer viable in our life. Isn't that something? We have to be careful. All right. So, anyway, I think that's about it. I want to make sure. I want to make sure I hit my nose. I don't miss anything. Looks like we did good. Yeah. So when you hear messages, be careful. They don't have to be right. They don't have to be perfect. Remember, we know in part. We talked Wednesday, and I'll leave you with this, okay? You're always going to see things that are wrong with people. Remember what Jesus said. I want you to remember this. When we were talking earlier, he said this. He said, you have one teacher, the Christ. All the offices, the true offices of the church, apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher, are set by Christ. Okay? So just as the husband works for father in the house, does that make sense? In the home. The fivefold works for Jesus in the church. And just as the king works for God, or the prime minister works for God in civil government. If you don't believe that, read Paul's writings. He said everybody should respect the civil authority. Pay your taxes and do all these kind of things. Why? You know why? Because God set that authority too. He also said the one that rules over you is set by God to keep peace. So see, we can't just, God never authorizes lawlessness. That's just ridiculousness to think that. But so many people in the church think so. But it's a shame. It's a detriment. But anyway, last thing. I don't even know if I ought to say that. Let's just say this. If you see a minister and they're doing something wrong, note that. You may want to go to them and tell them that in love. But there's no office in the church by which the congregation corrects ministers. And you find it in the Bible, bring it to me, and I'll stand up here and show it to everybody, but you won't find it. Because it works like this. That accountability that is created is to God and from God. It doesn't flow down. You know what I'm saying? So when you go to lunch and you hear people talking about their preacher, I'm not saying you guys do it. I'm saying it happens. I'm saying we've all done it. Okay? We have all done it. Just remember, you're judging God. Because if they're truly set, then you're judging Him. Because I promise you, He set them, you didn't. If you think you did, then you're way off. And if you think that a pastor is just somebody that went to college and got a degree and that's it, and you don't understand that there's a spiritual anointing that goes with it, or an evangelist or something like that, you're way off. And I want to talk to you. Because I don't want you to hurt yourself and get in trouble. God's serious about those things. So here's the deal. There was a guy, and he was a prophet, and his name was Elijah, and he did great works for God. He even said it wouldn't rain, and for 3.5 years, based on his word, it didn't rain. You understand? Elijah called fire from heaven down, and it devoured an offering and water in a trough around it when Baal's prophets couldn't even get a spark. So he was anointed by God, but you know what? He wasn't perfect. He was wrong. He went out in the wilderness and started whining and moaning to God. He left his ministry, went and started whining and moaning to God. God finally met him out there and said, "What is wrong with you, man?" Elijah said, "God, there's nobody left. It's just me. I'm the only one that knows anything, God. I'm the only prophet left." Right? That's what he said. "I'm the only one that'll hold true to what you're doing." God said, "Get up, straighten up." And he made him feel better, talked to him, and then you know what he told him? He said, "By the way, Elijah, you are my man for this job, and I am truly with you. But you are wrong. There are at least 7,000 other people who have not bowed a knee to Baal." Don't be one of these people that thinks somebody has to be perfect to be God's man or woman for this time. That's utter stupidity. There are too many examples in the Bible. Don't follow this worldly trend that thinks they know everything about God and they don't need God's delegated authorities in their life, and they can make fun of his titles and the things that he does. Guys, you can't make fun of what God institutes and then out of the same mouth say, I'm with God. That's folly. It's utter craziness. There is no way. You're either with him all the way or you ain't there. Right? You're either for me or against me. Now, you do have people that work in ignorance now, and he gives them grace. But again, that's why you never call a prophet a false prophet unless it's intentional deceit. Because if they just don't know something and they're out of their heart truly working according to a call, he will be accountable for whatever mistakes they make. But if you go off following somebody who doesn't have that, he is not accountable for whatever mistakes they cause in your life by counseling you or teaching you or leading you. He's just going to look at you and say, I gave you a Bible, you ought to know better.